Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining me on the webinar today. My name is Neil Cameron, and I head the payroll team at Sheeran Tate. At Sheeran Tate, we provide payroll support for over 200 organisations across all sectors that range in staff level from 1 employee up to 300 employees. And I've been involved in the payroll world for 25 years, and over the past 10 years I've seen payroll becoming more complex with additional responsibilities, reporting requirements and deadlines to meet for employers. In addition to the core responsibility of paying employees accurately and on time, there are many new challenges within the payroll function. Pension auto-enrolment is well underway, pension re-enrolment has started, the Apprenticeship Levy is introduced from April 2017, and gender pay gap reporting also starts in April. Other initiatives such as the employment allowance, Scottish rate of income tax and the living and national minimum wage responsibilities mean that the payroll function is even more critical to an organisation and is a constant moving target. So during the webinar today, I'll provide an overview of the Apprenticeship Levy, cover the requirements of automatic re-enrolment, discuss gender pay gap reporting, and we'll close off with an update on the living and national minimum wage increases which are aligned for the first time. My colleague Stuart Miller from our marketing team is with us today. You will see that Stuart will type messages during the webinar in the box that you will see on screen. If you have any issues regarding sound or slides, please let Stuart know by typing a message into the dialog box. There'll be 10 minutes or so for questions at the end of the webinar, so please type any questions into the box and we'll answer these at the end of the webinar. So moving on to our first subject, the Apprenticeship Levy. The Apprenticeship Levy is an interesting piece of legislation. It was announced and implemented in a relatively short period of time compared to the introduction of other legislation, and also slightly removed from the payroll aspect. The funding of qualifications for apprentices has a different process in England than the rest of the UK. So I've selected 3 areas that I thought it would be best for us to cover today. I'll talk through, for completeness, some background to the Apprenticeship Levy, payroll requirements and the levy allowance, how the funding will operate, and also a short action plan / checklist to help with the responsibilities. So the Apprenticeship Levy was first announced by George Osborne in the November 2015 budget with the aim to raise £3 billion a year to meet a target of 3 million new apprenticeships by 2020. And with this, a clear focus on developing the UK skills and improving long-term productivity. The government is committed to increasing the quantity and quality of apprenticeships while also putting control of funding firmly in the hands of the employer. So the levy will replace all taxpayer funding of apprenticeships for all organisations of all sizes, and it will start from April 2017 at a rate of 0.5% of an employer's wage bill. And I'll cover what the definition of an employer's wage bill is in a few minutes. The Apprenticeship Levy will be paid to HMRC through Pay-as-you-earn, PAYE. Now, the government estimates that approximately 22,000 organisations will be required to pay the levy, and if you're an employer with an annual pay bill of more than £3 million per annum or £250,000 per month, you will be affected from April 2017. So the good news is that each employer will receive a £15,000 annual allowance to offset against their levy. The allowance will be allocated in 12 blocks of £1,250, so that's £1,250 for each tax month in the year. And any part of the allowance which is unused in one month can be carried forward to the next month. A connected person rule, which is similar to the one used for employment allowance, will mean that employers who operate multiple payrolls will only be able to claim one allowance for the levy. So the levy will be charged at a rate of 0.5%. on an employer's pay bill, and the pay bill is defined as employer's total earnings subject to employer's national insurance. The levy will be calculated through the payroll process and shown on your payroll reports. You will need to consider fluctuating monthly pay bills if you are near to the threshold. And we must remember that it's not just large employers who will be affected. An employer with a workforce of 100 people and an average salary of just over £30,000 will take an organisation over the threshold. Employers who are under the threshold and not paying the levy will continue to have access to government funding to support apprenticeships and training as before. So I'd just like to talk through a month-by-month example of how the apprenticeship levy is calculated. It's calculated in a similar fashion to PAYE tax. So on the example on the slide here, in tax month 1, April, an employer's pay bill is £500,000. So the calculation of the apprenticeship levy is 0.5% of £500,000, which is £2,500, less the monthly allowance of £1,250, leaving a payment in April of £1,250. Moving on to May, tax month 2, the pay bill in that month reduces to £400,000. So the cumulative calculation is 0.5% of £900,000, being the total pay bill for April and May, which is £4,500, less the allowance of £2,500, which is 2 months' worth of £1,250. So the calculation is £4,500 levy, minus £2,500 allowance for the year, minus £1,250, which was the payment in April, leaving a payment of £750 in May, and then so on for the remainder of the tax year. Now the levy will be paid through PAYE, and it will need to be reported to HMRC on your employer payment summary on a monthly basis. And the employer payment summary is the report that you provide if you are recovering any statutory payments such as statutory maternity pay. Now HMRC are updating the EPS to contain new fields required to report the levy and also the levy allowance. Technical guidance was provided to software developers in December 2016, so not that long ago, who will in turn need to update their software for April 17, and this is to allow the functionality to enable calculation, reporting and recording of the levy and allowance. So the EPS will be updated to include the following: the amount of the annual apprenticeship levy allowance that has been allocated to the PAYE scheme, and also the amount of the apprenticeship levy owed to date in the current tax year. So the first EPS report that will contain apprentice levy information will be due to be with HMRC on 19th of May 2017, and the first payment of the levy will be due with your PAYE and NIC payment on or before 22nd of May if you're paying electronically, 19th of May if you're not. So employers do not need to report the apprenticeship levy on the EPS if they have not had to pay it in the current tax year. Just a short word on payroll software. If you process your payroll in-house, you may need to manually activate the apprenticeship levy field in your software. This will be easier to manage if you know your pay bill will always be over £250,000, and especially in the first tax month of the year. If your pay bill fluctuates and is around the threshold, then you will need to review it on a monthly basis. After you activate the apprenticeship levy in your software, it will then need to be reported on an EPS for the remainder of the tax year as it brings the apprenticeship allowance into play. Non-payment of the apprenticeship levy will have the same penalties, time limits and appeal procedures for income tax. Now, apprenticeships are a devolved policy, which means that authorities in each of the UK nations manage their own apprenticeship programmes, including how funds are spent on apprenticeship training. A digital Apprenticeship Service will support the English apprenticeship system. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own arrangements for supporting employers to access apprenticeships. And I'll speak in a few minutes about how the funding administration will operate in Scotland. So, the apprenticeship levy that employers will pay will go into a central pot, which is estimated to be in the region of £3 billion in a year. From there, the Scottish Government will receive £221 million, the Welsh Government £128 million, and the Northern Ireland Executive £76 million. And this is a population-based agreement with Scotland, and Scotland will receive an additional £9 million of funding in years 18-19 and 19-20. Organisations in these nations can apply for funding for their apprenticeship qualifications and other training needs from this pot. It's just the qualification and training courses that will be funded. If you employ an apprentice, then salary costs will be the responsibility of the employer. In England, the process is slightly different in that every organisation will have access to their own individual pot via the digital apprenticeship service, and this will support the English apprenticeship system. So on the slide there, you'll see that England, I've just used an example with 4 organisations. In reality, this is likely to be tens of thousands, and these employers will have their own pot, so they'll be able to log into their digital account and actually see the amount of apprenticeship levy that they have paid, and from here use that to fund apprenticeship training. So how will it work for us here in Scotland? Skills Development Scotland, SDS, will administer Scottish funding for apprentices. At present, there's no indication that the digital apprenticeship service model or scheme will be adopted in Scotland. And this is just a quote from the Skills Development Scotland website, which reads, by 2020, we'll provide 500,000 skills and learning opportunities, create or safeguard around 200,000 jobs, and invest around £1 billion in Scotland. So fairly ambitious, however important targets. Now, Scotland had a consultation and has taken into account the view of employers and wider stakeholders, and are proposing a much broader system to what is being proposed in England, meaning that people looking for a way into the workplace will have more options and flexibility, which allows employers to address skills gaps in the training needs of existing employees where a full apprenticeship might not be appropriate. Now, on the slide, you'll see the website address for Skills Development Scotland, and this really is the hub. This contains all the information that you need around services and qualification providers that are available. And employers can also advertise any vacancies that they have if they decide to take on an apprentice. So Skills Development Scotland website is a place to go for all information on qualifications providers, for example. So just a short action plan checklist to help you through the process. Firstly, identify your pay bill and keep an eye out for fluctuating payments. Remember, after you report the apprenticeship levy once on your EPS, you'll have to continue to report it for the full tax year. Decide who is responsible in your organisation. It's likely to be the person responsible for payroll that will ensure that payments are made to HMRC along with the reporting requirements. However, you may want to have someone responsible for researching qualifications and providers and managing the funding applications. Also check your payroll software capabilities, because this will support you through the process to ensure that you report accurately to HMRC. And this legislation is fairly new. Keep checking for any changes to the legislation, especially regarding the funding process. Well, that's at the end of the apprenticeship levy section. I'll now go through and talk about pension automatic re-enrolment. So just a quick recap on auto-enrolment before we move on to re-enrolment. And I'm sure everyone will recognise our friend here from TV and media advertisements. So under the system of auto-enrolment, every employer in the UK is required to help more of their workers to save for retirement. People are living longer, yet too many people are either not saving enough or not saving at all for retirement. And the new auto-enrolment rules make it easier for millions of people to build up a pension. Auto-enrolment commenced in October 2012, with very large employers being the first stage. So moving on to the requirements of re-enrolment. In this section, we'll cover what is re-enrolment, who will it affect, choosing a re-enrolment date, dealing with opt-outs, and again, an action plan to help you with the process. So re-enrolment is the process of automatically putting eligible workers back into the workplace pension scheme. It's the employer's responsibility to make arrangements and establish active membership of the pension scheme again for their employees. So all employers must re-enrol their eligible workers who are no longer in the workplace pension scheme, and that's because they chose to opt out or they cease membership after the employer staging date. And they have to be re-enrolled into the pension scheme on a 3-yearly cycle. This happens approximately 3 years after you staged for auto-enrolment, and the pension regulator will send a series of emails and letters informing you of what the requirements are and what you will need to do. To ensure that you receive this correspondence, it's best to make sure that your contact details are up to date with the pension regulator, as they may have changed in the 3 years since you initially staged for auto-enrolment. Okay, so firstly, choosing your re-enrolment date. An employer can select the re-enrolment date from any date that falls within a 6-month window, which starts 3 months before the 3rd anniversary of your original staging date and ends 3 months after the anniversary. So just a few points to note here. Months mean calendar months. The re-enrolment date is set at the employer level and cannot be varied between different groups of employees. And also, postponement is not available for an employer to use automatic re-enrolment. If an employer does not want to have part period pension contributions calculated, they may wish to consider using a re-enrolment date that is the first day of their pay reference period. So just an example of a re-enrolment window. In this example, an employer has an original staging date of 1st of April 2014. Therefore, the first re-enrolment window is between 1st of January 2017, which is 3 months before 1st of April, and 30th of June 2017, which is 3 months after 1st of April. And the purpose of this flexibility is to assist where an employer may wish to align the re-enrolment date with other key dates in their business calendar, such as the start of the organisation's financial year, or the date which workers choose their options within a flexible benefit scheme. Additionally, an employer may have seasonal peaks that they would like to avoid, as re-enrolment may result in an influx of new pension scheme members along with the associated communication requirements. The same date applies to all workers included in the assessment at re-enrolment. So this is whether they are monthly salary paid or weekly wage workers. It will be the same date for both pay frequencies. So what is the re-enrolment process? Essentially, you must re-enroll previous eligible workers who voluntarily ceased or opted out of active membership of the pension scheme more than 12 months before your selected re-enrolment date. You will need to carry out an assessment of your staff on the re-enrolment date to see whether they meet the age and earnings criteria to be re-enrolled. And this will apply to all staff that have previously been assessed for auto-enrolment and have, as I mentioned, opted out of the workplace pension scheme, have left the pension scheme under the scheme rules, not as opt-out, but known as ceasing active membership after the opt-out period, or have stayed in the pension scheme but have chosen to reduce the level of pension contributions below the minimum level required by auto-enrolment. Now, the employer does not have to re-enrol any eligible job holder where any of these 4 events have occurred in the previous 12 months. So there's no need to reassess staff who are already in the pension scheme used for auto-enrolment, are aged 21 or under, are at state pension age or over, or are being postponed for automatic enrolment due to being a new employee to the organisation under the normal postponement rules. So just a recap on the cost of providing a workplace pension scheme to your organisation. On the slide, you will see the minimum pension contribution rates along with the dates the statutory increases will take place. And it was announced in the 2015 autumn statement that the next 2 phases of minimum rate increases will be aligned with tax years. Therefore, rather than the increases taking place in October 2017, they will now occur in April 2018. So at present, we're sitting at employer contribution 1%, employee 1%. In April 2018, it will increase to 2% employer and 3% employee. And then from April 2019, the employer increases to 3% and the employee to 5%. So it may be that you see that April 18 and April 19, you see more traffic and employees deciding to leave the pension scheme. As an example, a contribution, which is currently £20 per month, will increase to £60 per month in April 18 and then £100 a month in April 19. So it's at that point you may then see more employees deciding to leave the workplace pension scheme, and then in years to come there'll be more employees that will be included in the re-enrolment process. So as regards the communication and opting out, very similar to your initial staging date, you must write to eligible workers individually within 6 weeks of the re-enrolment date to tell them how re-enrolment will apply to them. And the re-enrolment date is also the start date for the calculation of contributions to the workplace pension scheme for the job holders who are being re-enrolled. So once you have re-enrolled your staff and contributions collected, they will remain in the pension scheme unless the employees decide to opt out. So they actively make the decision to leave the scheme, or they leave the scheme after the opt-out period has ended. There's a 1-month time frame in which employees can opt out of the scheme. If any employee chooses to do so, you will need to process opt-out notices and keep records accordingly, as you do at the moment under auto-enrolment rules. So there are various responsibilities that you must meet. As I mentioned, you must ensure that all eligible employees are re-enrolled into the scheme at the appropriate time. So that doesn't include any employees who are in the pension scheme at the moment. It's only employees who have decided to opt out or who have left the scheme. And also you must complete a redeclaration of compliance within 5 calendar months of the 3rd anniversary of your staging date. You need to complete the redeclaration telling the pension regulator what your chosen redeclaration date is, and that's even if you have no eligible members of staff to re-enrol. And this redeclaration is mandatory. Any failure to complete it on time could mean that duties have not been met and could result in enforcement action, including fines. So in terms of planning and implementation, there's some key action points for employers. First one, obviously, choose your re-enrolment date, decide what that is. Speak with your payroll software supplier regarding the software capabilities. Ensure that practical training is given to your employees who will be involved with re-enrolment. So that could be the person responsible for payroll or including HR. And plan any changes to the payroll process and timetable in the month that you decide to re-enroll your employees to ensure that all obligations will be met. So that's the end of the re-enrolment section. I'd now like to move on to gender pay gap reporting. So from April 2017, organisations with more than 250 staff will have to provide a report which discloses gender pay gaps in salary and bonus payments made to their male and female staff. Data must be published on the organisation's website and also on a dedicated government website by 4th of April in the year following the calculations. As far as I'm aware, the government's dedicated website is still at the development stage. Now, the reporting will surround a snapshot date, and the first date is 5th of April 2017, which means an organisation would have until 4th of April 2018 to publish their report. And you must publish a report if you have 250 or more employees at 5th of April 2017. Now, it's a head count of 250 employees, therefore any part-time staff will count as one employee in the head count. The information must be kept online for at least 3 years, which means it will be accessible for all to see, so customers and staff as an example. And it's not the difference between payment levels for people doing the same job, which is equal pay. The gender pay gap refers to overall average levels of pay for men and women. And the move is designed to highlight disparities in pay and bonuses between men and women, and it will apply to all types of organisation. Now, confidentiality of salary and wage payments will not be an issue, as you're not reporting any pay rates. It's a percentage gap in pay between male and female that is published. So, firstly, you need to report your mean gender pay gap and your median gender pay gap, and these pay gaps will be calculated on hourly rate equivalents. And the ACAS website provides technical assistance on how to calculate down to hourly rate, taking into account of part-time staff, for example. So after you've done the calculation and you've drilled down to what your average male hourly rate is and what your average female hourly rate is, what you will publish is the percentage gap between those two figures. And the ACAS website again provides guidance on how you actually do this calculation. Included in ordinary pay, which is the definition of what should be included in the hourly rate calculation, is basic pay, allowances, pay for piecework, pay for leave, and shift premium. And it only includes money payments, so anything such as benefits in kind is excluded. Also, gross amounts after any salary sacrifice arrangements should be used. Note that ordinary pay does not include overtime, redundancy or termination of employment, pay in lieu of annual leave, or pay which is not money. It is also a requirement to report the bonus gender pay gap in a similar way to ordinary pay. Now, which will be based on bonus payments in the 12 months before the snapshot date. So with the first date being 5th of April 2017, the reporting period for bonus gender pay gap would be 6th of April 2016 until 5th of April 2017. And as I mentioned, the calculation of the bonus gender pay gaps is similar to that of the main gender pay gap reporting. Also, you need to report on your proportion of males and females receiving a bonus payment, and also the proportion of males and females when divided into 4 groups ordered from lowest to highest pay. So after you've got your average hourly rates, if your lowest average hourly rate was £10 and your highest average hourly rate was £18, what you would have to do is break these down into 4 groups. So you'd be reporting between £10 and £12, and then £12 and £14, £14 and £16, and then £16 and £18. And what you need to publish is the proportion of males and females in each of these 4 groups. Also, you need to publish a high-level narrative to explain findings and flag any potential issues. You are required by law to publish and report your organisation's figures if you are a relevant employer. The Quality and Human Rights Commission can enforce any failure to comply with these regulations. Employers will also run a reputational risk if they fail to publish the information, and in many occasions the suspicions behind why an employer failed to publish the report could have a negative impact and be far worse than what the report would have shown. So I've noted some tips to help with the implementation of gender pay gap reporting. Firstly, legislation. Keep an eye on any changes to the legislation. It's a new initiative and things could change. Use the ACAS website. From the research I've done, ACAS is providing the best information for employers. Also, Barclays Bank voluntarily publish a gender pay gap report at the moment. It's available on their website and worth a view to get an idea of the format of the report. Software. Now, keep a lookout for software that will be available to help automate the process. A lot of the information will be held in payroll records. However, I'm sure that the software that's available may be helpful in being able to extract that information and pull together the information for your report. And also responsibility. Decide who will have the ultimate responsibility for the report in your organisation. To get to the end result of a report that is ready to be published, it is likely to involve different departments and people in your organisation. Decide on who will be involved and the process to publishing a report that will be available for all to see. So that's the end of the gender pay gap section. I'd like to close off the webinar with a short word on the increases to the national living wage rate and the national minimum wage rates, which have been aligned for the first time from 1st of April 2017. Now, the national living wage for over 25-year-olds is increasing from £7.20 per hour to £7.50 per hour. National minimum wage rates also increase in April, with the rate for employees aged 21 to 24 years increasing from £6.95 to £7.05 per hour, and the rates in the age bands for employees aged 20 years and younger are also increasing. So check the ages of your employees and be ready to increase the rates at 1st of April. 1st of April this year falls on a Saturday, therefore if you process a weekly payroll, you're not likely to have a week where the rates are split between the old and new rates, as has happened in previous years. Well, that's the end of the webinar. I hope you found it to be helpful. We have around 10 minutes for questions that you have. Okay, so there is a few questions that have come in. The first one surrounding the apprenticeship levy. The question is, my pay bill fluctuates throughout the year, dropping below the threshold later in the year. Can I use the monthly allowance to offset or average out payments? Yes, so essentially any allowance which you have not used in an earlier part of the year, you can use in a later part of the year where you have an apprenticeship levy to pay. A question regarding re-enrolment. None of our employees have opted out of our workplace pension scheme. What are our responsibilities? Okay, in that case, if you have no opt-outs, you obviously have no one to re-enroll. However, what you do need to do is complete your re-declaration of compliance with the pension regulator, and that needs to be done 5 months after, a maximum of 5 months after your re-enrolment date. Another question on the apprenticeship levy. Can I confirm that if we don't pay for the levy, we can still get funding for apprenticeships, and how do we apply for it? Well, yes, you do not have to pay the Apprenticeship Levy to qualify for the funding. And this is where the argument is that it's been classed as an additional employment tax. If you do want to apply for funding, Skills Development Scotland website is the place to go for all that information. You would also apply for funding through Skills Development Scotland. And the good thing, in Scotland is that the funding that's available is not just for new apprentices. You can use the funding for qualifications and training for existing staff or any new staff who would you like to send on training courses. So Skills Development Scotland website is the place to go. Regarding gender pay gap reporting, a question is, do I have to include contract workers who happen to be in on 5th of April? And quite simply, the answer to that is yes, you do. Contract workers need to be included in the calculation for gender pay gap, drilling down to hourly rate and also included in your percentage pay gap reporting. A question regarding re-enrolment again. What if our employees don't want to re-enroll? Well, the re-enrolment process is very similar to your initial staging date when you had to enrol all members of staff. Essentially, the employees don't have an option in this. If they are an eligible job holder who has opted out of the pension scheme or ceased active membership, then effectively they need to go back into the mix. You need to add them back into the pension scheme. A contribution needs to be collected, and the employee then needs to make the active decision to opt out of the pension scheme again. Again, a question on gender pay gap reporting. Do 2 people job sharing count as 1 or 2 in the head count? Well, it is a head count, so essentially 2 people job sharing would count as 2 employees in your head count. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have. My contact details are on screen. If there is any additional questions that come to mind, please contact me. My telephone number and email address is on the slide. Again, thanks very much for listening. I hope you found the webinar to be helpful. Good afternoon.